joined by a special guest, Chris Anstey, former NBA player with the Dallas Mavericks, with the Chicago Bulls, the 18th overall selection of the 97 draft. But Chris has a special connection to our New York Knicks, and that was he was a client of Leon Rose, I believe the first NBA client dating back 96. But Chris, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. No, Leon and the Rose family hold a special place in my heart. There, as you say, no, I wasn't his first client. Rick Brunson was his first client.
Yep.
Simple connection, and Rick ended up playing over in Australia, where I was playing for the Adelaide 36ers under coach Mike Dunlap, who was most recently at the Milwaukee Bucks. And
Yep.
Mike and my coach Brian Gorgon were close, and when it became apparent that I needed representation because there was some NBA interest, I suppose you have the conversations with the big companies like anyone else, but I was only new to basketball, and my only condition, or I suppose the only thing I was looking for, was someone that I trusted. And Mike Dunlap recommended that it was worth having a conversation with Leon. He had his legal background. He was great to deal with Rick. And what he said happened. Then he wouldn't overinflate anyone. He'd tell you the truth. And Leon flew all the way from Cherry Hill, New Jersey, to Melbourne, Australia, to meet with me. And we spoke for an hour. And when that hour was done, quite literally, I looked at him and said, "Do you want to do this?" And he looked back and he said, "You sure?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And Dunlap trusts you, Gorgon trusts you. I'm in. And when I was drafted in the 1997 draft, I became his first NBA client. As I said, as he went further down the track, of course, I fell further and further down his speed dial. But no, look, he remains someone close to me and my family, and he's got a very strong connection to Australian basketball. I wasn't the only Australian basketball player he represented. He was over here, 5-6 times a year, representing the National Basketball League players here in Australia and getting them summer league opportunities and the like. So he's been really, really heavily involved over here.
Yeah, I guess that just speaks to his work ethic. You mentioned he flew down, and I was reading up on this on the background. Did he have a connection with Mike through ball, or was it through Gorgon? Or
Quite literally, that he was the coach of Rick Brunson's team. That was it.
Okay, yep.
And so that was the only connection. You're right. His work ethic has always been incredible. His advice is always sound. It took his wife Donna over 20 years of him coming to Australia to actually come for the first time. But no, look, more than anything, he's incredibly trustworthy. He does things the right way, and you're probably only just now starting to get a sense of it at the Knicks. I know there's a level of frustration that he doesn't speak publicly, but he prefers to do his work quietly. He prefers to have his conversations behind closed doors. And whether he's there a year, 5 years, or 2 decades, I have no doubt that the Knicks will be in a better place when he leaves than when he walked in. I think we're just starting to understand some of where he's beginning to place the club when it comes to free agency this year.
Yeah, I guess you could understand the magnitude of the role, Chris, like being, one of the biggest agents in the league, in the industry with CAA, but being a president of a club that hasn't won, in 50 years. A lot of unsuccessful executives and presidents have come through the Knicks. What was your initial impression when you first found out that Leon Rose is becoming the president of the Knicks and giving up the agent world?
Yeah, look, he wasn't the first. Mental blank, his name escapes me, the Golden State Warriors, who just stepped down.
Bob Myers?
Right.
Yep.
He sort of paved the way, I suppose, in recent history, and did it very successfully. I suppose my initial thoughts were Leon's relationship with all of the players he's represented is strong. His relationships around the NBA was solid. But what I expected to happen first was that there'd be a significant shift in culture. The Knicks have underperformed to the expectations of locals for a long time now, and it's not just a matter of bringing in a superstar or two and hoping that that fixes things. I think it needed to be fixed from the ground up, as any organisation has to be, and the culture needed to be reset. The club needed the right people, not only in the court but in the front office, to make the right choices and to make choices that would benefit the club, not themselves. And again, that's on and off court. And no, as I say, I had no illusion, and I mean, I'm looking at it from afar, but how great a challenge it was going to be, and I hoped that there would be at least a little bit of patience. Historically, your owner, Mike, is it Mike Dolan?
James.
James Dolan has had a reasonably big influence in some of the bigger decisions, and I'm also reasonably sure that one of the biggest parts of Leon coming in was that he was trusted to make some of those big decisions without being, without going the other direction. So look, it's been fun to watch. It's been, my journey even in basketball. It's almost come full circle with Jalen signing at the club, and the Brunsons and the Roses again being intertwined. And again, you speak about a family that the Rose family trusts and the Brunson family trust. I think that's a really good bedrock for the club to have that kind of relationship to be able to build upon.
Yeah, there's so many connections here. For those that may not know, Rick Brunson was playing in Australia, his very first pro contract. I believe Rick went undrafted in 95 or 96, then landed a role with the Adelaide 36ers, which is Josh Giddey's NBL team. And that's where, Chris, you played against Rick, right? When you were, a 17-year-old? Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit older, but yeah, probably 20, 21, yep.
Yep. Yeah. And then
Rick,
Rick,
I was late getting drafted, so Leon, as much as I took a chance on Leon clearly took a chance on me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then he took you to the States, right? And you went around, visited some colleges. Fans are curious, sort of, what was Leon Rose's management style? Was he really hands-on? Was he like a really player relation?
Yeah, and at the same time, he never wanted to put me in a situation that was going to do a disservice to my skill set and probably to my personality. Look, we always toured and played American colleges with our Australian professional team in our off season. We used to play exhibition series of games, and Leon would travel around and quite literally stay in the background. He had organised the year before I got drafted to work out with Seattle, Philadelphia, and New York, and I did that, and that was very eye-opening. But even having seen that, one of Leon, and I played really well in those college games, but Leon's greatest piece of advice was your strength isn't going to be your individual workouts, it's going to be your team play. And similar to probably in recent times what Dante Exum did to get drafted, Leon's advice was, don't, as great as you think you're going to go, don't come over to work out. There are enough teams who I'm sure will draft you in the first round. Turned out that we were guaranteed that I had a very, very late first round guarantee. And as Leon said, the upside to coming and working out was very minimal. The downside could be huge if I stuffed up the workouts, was unfamiliar in the environment and did poorly. So Leon's advice was get to work in Australia, do what you got to do. Let me take care of the back end, and I don't want this to be a distraction for you. We probably, we'd speak all the time, but not about basketball. And it wasn't until, the draft came closer that we really started having some genuine conversations. I met with a few clubs, but as much as anything, it was non-invasive, and Leon wasn't trying to sell me on anything. He was just presenting fact, doing his work, and not putting me in every conversation that might go nowhere. So I'm sure there was a lot of feedback that never got to me, and he sheltered me from. So he was absolutely fantastic in that way.
And yeah, sounds great. What was the best piece of advice then you've received from Leon, or a couple of pieces of advice, sort of navigating the pro game? And
Yeah,
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you were drafted higher than what you'd both expected.
right. Then the best piece of advice was don't try to be someone that you're not. Don't try to prove you need to be there. Don't try to all of a sudden develop a skill set that hasn't got you here. Be who you are, and that's
Yep.
both on and off the court. Clearly I went to the Dallas Mavericks, who were struggling and had a lot of players. My 3 years in the NBA were on struggling teams and when you're in those sort of teams, I guess you'll learn this later on, but
Mm.
there are a lot of players looking for their own individual opportunities ahead of team success when you know that team success isn't going to come. But look, Leon would always give me basketball, but probably the best thing he did was he always gave me sound advice on how to look after my money, invest my money, what to be aware of, what to be careful of. But again, he never
Mm.
told me I was better than what I was, promised anything he couldn't deliver. And, eventually, Rick made the NBA and had the same advice. And he had a few fringe players. I think the first genuine, probably creeping towards star he had was Eddie Jones at the Lakers, who,
Yep.
Leon represented one of his end of the bench teammates. And I think the way Leon picked up all of his clients, and who became high profile clients, was the players spoke, and we'd always speak. There are always horror stories about things an agent says or promises or something shady that happens. We always spoke about how great Leon was and how we trust him, and he ended up picking up clients, I suppose, organically more so than going out and selling himself.
Yeah, I guess he had that passion for hoops, right? You mentioned that when he first spoke to you. Did you see bigger things on the horizon, or was it?
I was too naive. I wouldn't profess to know, but you're right. He loves
Yeah,
hoops. He still used to go down and play in the local YMCA pick-up games in Cherry Hill, and he took me down a
yeah,
couple of times. And you very rarely see Leon emotional, but if you ever want to, go and watch him play basketball. He's an angry little man when he gets on a basketball court. I found that quite humorous to watch, actually, when he'd get on the court. But he's a better player than what you think. He shoots the ball well. He's really competitive. So clearly that streak has to exist. But no, he loves hoops. He's a fully qualified lawyer, so I was never in any trouble. Um, but yeah, he said to me early that as much as he loved the law and was qualified to practice it, his passion was basketball, and he wanted to find a way to combine the two. And it's exactly what he's gone and done.
yeah. He's left he's leaving still a big mark in the sport. Representing the very best. And the unique relationship you guys have. Like, what's that relationship like today? I know throughout your whole career, did he represent you? And I think I read he negotiated a big deal for you in Russia also after your NBA days.
Leon Leon was my agent, plain and simple. He was the only guy I ever went to. He was the only guy I ever called my agent. Clearly, as you know, with or you may know with European
Mm.
basketball, is there are local agents that your own player agents deal with. So he utilized other relationships throughout Europe, but it was always him. The European deal, the Spanish deal, the Russian deal, the Spanish deal. When I came home, to play here in Australia, he wasn't required, but he was still my agent. Was never going to use anyone else. What's our relationship like now? It's exactly like it was really, really early into my playing career. We're mates. I respect him like crazy, but I respect him as a person more so than as a president or agent, because what you see is what you get with Leon.
Do you know if he grew up a Knicks fan, like being from New Jersey? Was there that closeness with the local scene? Or
No,
was he just a hoops fan in general?
I was a Philadelphia fan.
Yep.
Hill's pretty close to Philadelphia. I'm sure if he got pushed, he'd probably say he was a Philly fan. But No, look, he's East Coast through and through.
Yeah, East Coast. And then definitely, so you were drafted by the Mavericks, the 18th overall selection. That must have been one of the best days in your life. Hectic. Um, and then, so you said you were on some losing teams. Was Leon a part of your main support network that guided you through those difficult times? And I know your second year would have been better being teammates with Nash and Dirk.
Yeah, look, it's you say guidance. It's just picking up the phone, having a conversation, whether there's an issue to speak about or not. But yeah, he was always the person I'd call first. He'd be in town visiting and spending time. He'd be connecting me with other people, to make it a little bit smoother. But no, you're right. The second, the first year, I mean, a lot of conversation of my time in the Mavericks comes back to Dirk and Steve, as it rightfully should, and I've remained friends with those two guys. But Michael Finley, Cedric Ceballos, Khalid Reeves, Eric Strickland. Michael Finley may be one of the most underrated NBA players I've ever seen in person. He was incredible. Some of the things he did and wasn't recognised for doing were, it's a shame in a way, but he's still involved in the club. And I think, you remove yourself 25 years, Finn's still involved at the club. Dirk will remain involved in the club. There are a lot of good people that the Cuban kept involved once he took over.
Yeah, and then the Last Dance. There was a period where you were going up against Michael Jordan, the best, Shaquille O'Neal, Patrick Ewing. We'll get your thoughts on in a second, but the Last Dance. So you were a part of a team that beat the Bulls, right, in your rookie year. Why don't you just sort of take us through that story of that anticipation?
How long have you got? No, look, that was one of the most memorable of my life. I tell people here in Australia, it's never great to make emotional choices. I reckon I went through the whole gamut of emotions. As you say, the level of excitement and nervousness leading into the game, to stepping onto the warm-up court and looking down the other end of the court and actually seeing Michael Jordan. And you referenced Shaquille O'Neal, Patrick Ewing and those guys. Not growing up playing basketball was probably less daunting for me than others because I hadn't idolized them my entire life. I grew up playing tennis, but Michael Jordan was different. There was just an aura about him. There was a sense of greatness around him. And, I'd been starting and I'd been playing well. And I got benched to begin this game. So all of that excitement and nervousness, I had my family who'd flown around the world and friends in the stands. I didn't play a minute in the first half. Don Nelson went with Sean Bradley. He was different, 7'6", protect the rim. The game wasn't going great. And, I remember thinking at halftime, and this is before social media and before games were televised back in Australia, then my friends wouldn't believe me that I played against Michael Jordan and I needed to get a photo. And the thought crossed my mind at halftime that if I'm going to get a photo, I can't go up and put my arm around him. If I get in garbage time, I've got to start a fight and hope someone takes a photo of it. Not my best thought, but it was a thought.
There's a lot going through your mind at that point.
It turns out I got on early in the third quarter, and that next emotion of surprise. I was so bad the first couple of possessions. I got some free throws. I missed them badly. I thought I'm getting out. I'll be dragged here in a minute. And again, I speak about it. Sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom, and granted, it's not rock bottom in any important sense where you played so badly in a game you built yourself up for. But once I missed those free throws, I just that's it. I might as well enjoy the next 2 or 3 possessions and soak in being on the court against these guys. And as soon as I stopped caring, I started playing okay, and I played a lot of the second half and, scored a few points, had a couple of rebounds. We took it to overtime and we won. And I was a part, 3.5 minutes I played in overtime. And I don't know, it's just one of those games that meant the absolute world to our team, to our players, I think to Dallas. And it didn't mean much to Chicago. They were on their way to winning their 6th championship. But I learned a lot from that game. I've got fond memories of the game. Michael Jordan and all of the Chicago Bulls aren't calling me for a rematch. So the only time I ever played Michael Jordan, I won, and there's very, very few people who can say that, over the years that Michael Jordan was wearing a Chicago Bulls jersey. So one of those horrible historical statistics that I'll cling on to for my kids, but a great memory.
Yeah, well, you played, you were competitive, you fought with passion, hard foul or not. I mean, you got chippy, you got into it with Dennis Rodman, as there are some images and footage out there as well. Did they just walk off the court and discuss? Did you have a chance? You know what they do now, Chris, where they, you shake the hands of every player after a game. It's a lot more, I would say, cordial than it was back then. Was it just kind of very more competitive?
I've always been pretty matter of fact, and absolutely was competitive, and it still is. And the physical sense of the amount of movement, and it's a different game. But back then, in really really simple terms, whatever a player says on the court, however strong and physically intimidating they are, they're not going to hit you. They're not going to start a fight in front of all. I mean, they'd be an idiot. So anyone who gets caught up in that, to me, isn't thinking right. And I've played a number of players where they'd come up and start talking and want you to bite and want to start a fight. And quite literally, I'd look them in the eye and say, "Start a fight. You've got a lot more to lose than I have." It's go. So that always tended to put them on the back foot just a little bit. But no, look, I still think it's really competitive. The league today in a holding, grappling, physically, that battle sense, it's different. But the skill level's higher, the demand, the space you have to guard's greater. So look, the game will continue to evolve. And, if you asked a lot of people 6-7 years ago, the big man was being phased out of the game. Now look, Jokic, Embiid, all of the great centers going around. Even Giannis is a big. Wembanyama coming into the league, it's going back and trending towards really talented big guys. So we could have this conversation in another 10 years, and we'll be sitting there, what were we talking about back? It'll change again.
Yeah, it evolves, and those that may not be as familiar with your game, you were one of the the early big men that came in with a deep, well, relatively deep range jump shot, which I love to get to know sort of how you develop. But our legend Patrick Ewing, you went up against the 99-00 Knicks that made the finals from the 8th seed. Now Patrick Ewing was sort of on the later stage of his career, and the Knicks were Latrell Sprewell and that. Was there any memories, any recollections that you can share with us about going up against Pat?
Funnily enough, talking trash to Patrick Ewing, and when you get a reputation in the league, oftentimes that level of respect over, growing up, you let a guy like Patrick Ewing have a dunk if he's open. You don't chase him down and foul him and put him on the line, which is what I did. I mean, I didn't care whether he was Patrick Ewing or another guy struggling for an NBA contract. I was going to, I was also one of those players who was naive enough to not care if I got, so many people cared if they got dunked on. I never cared. I mean, it's 2 points. It counts the same as a layup or 2 free throws. It doesn't matter. It's
Now they get out of the way because there's social media. There's
right. I mean, to me, that's selfish. And I always, I'd rather get dunked on 7 times and block 3 than not even make a play at the ball. So I went up and fouled him pretty hard, made sure he didn't finish at the rim, and he took exception to it because he wasn't used to being fouled like that. And I can't tell you what he said, but when he came and I tested my theory. I thought, I know he's not going to start a fight, but he's pretty intimidating. He was pretty angry. But look, even just, stepping onto the floor, and this happened at Madison Square Garden. It was another one of those moments in my history that was really, really special because as much as I didn't grow up playing basketball, it's a world-renowned arena. There'd been so much history occur in that stadium and on that floor. It was special to be afforded the privilege to compete on it a few times.
Yeah, is it your favorite arena to compete in?
You know what? It's probably the most historical, but there was some in Spain that I think the crowd makes the arena. Um, the crowds throughout Europe, through Spain, in Italy, in Greece, are insane. Playing in my home country in the Sydney Olympic Games was incredible. I just think there's something special about wherever your home court is, drawing a line in the sand and protecting it and having your family and friends turn up and being a part of that you don't get on the road. So it's certainly the most historical. Whether it's my favourite, probably not. Um, didn't tend to play well there. um,
Yeah, it's
but,
intimidating.
but it's interesting, even if I was to fast forward to just last year, I took two groups of Australians across and just watching their face and watching them quite literally look down as they set foot onto the floor in amazement that they were on the floor at Madison Square Garden kind of reminded me how big a deal it is to set foot, and how hallowed that court is.
Yeah, and just on that 1919, they underachieved throughout the regular season. There were some injuries, kind of like, I mean, similar to the Miami Heat's team this year. You knew they had the potential. Was that a big surprise for you, or was that just still a bit of a blur because it was early? Because I think you went on and were teammates with John Starks, right?
No, I wasn't, but um, was it a surprise? I was on holiday, and we didn't get much of it in Australia once I got home. So I'd keep an eye on it. But once I was out, I've always been one of those. Even here in Australia, as soon as we're eliminated, I don't like watching the other teams fight for what I was fighting for. So probably watched it as little as anyone else. No, I never played with John Starks, but met the man a couple of times. But I'm sure if you asked him, he wouldn't remember meeting me.
Yeah, I know he was traded to the Bulls that year, but he only played 4 games, so it was probably not, yeah, aligned. Um,
Yeah, I got there in the off season of 1999 2000.
Yep. Yeah. He was, yeah, a beloved Nick that was traded. But in terms of that, like, just take us through just the player's mindset. Were you traded from Dallas to the Bulls, or were you cut and then signed?
No, I was traded, and look, I had a couple of arguments, personality clashes with a couple of people in Dallas, and uh, when I didn't expect to be traded, and it always hurts because you feel like you're no longer required. But I suppose the positive that came out of it was the Bulls were a team that I'd spoken a lot to pre-draft, and they were still interested, which was nice. Now, the mindset of going into a club where you know you're going to be really bad is an interesting one. The level of expectation from the Chicago public was really low, as it should have been. Um, and a lot of the lessons that I learned through my time in Chicago, I learned after the event, not during it. It was a hard year. It was a new city. It was a new team. The remnants, Randy Brown, Dickie Simpkins, Will Perdue, these sort of guys were fantastic guys. But clearly we lacked the talent to compete night in, night out. So the wins we got, we celebrated. Um, it turns out that as they moved forward, I hadn't done enough to secure a second NBA contract as much as Leon may have tried. But no, the end of my NBA time, coincided with the start of the Sydney Olympic Games. And by the end of the Olympics, I knew I wasn't coming back. So I moved on with my basketball career.
Yeah, and that very, very successfully locally and in Russia, like we spoke on earlier. Leon Rose doing still, yeah, representing and doing the best for all his clients. Um, in terms of the current Knicks, and since Leon's come on, you mentioned a word earlier, Chris, patience. Um, a lot of presidents want to come in and make a huge splash. I think what I've taken from Leon so far is we're not quick triggered to make a trade just for a bigger name if it doesn't make sense. How have you seen the Knicks over the last few years, and then culminating to being this successful year that they've just had?
Just as you say, I think a lot of people were disappointed that the Donovan Mitchell trade didn't get through, but it would have jeopardized another year or two of growth to do that, especially when you had Jalen. Whether or not Jalen and Donovan could have coexisted is still debatable in my mind, and this is not Leon's opinion, it's mine. It certainly wouldn't have been an incredible defensive backcourt, and I think Donovan Mitchell, once you had Jalen, would have been nice but not necessary, and you wouldn't give up what they were asking you to give up to get that done. Now, what I think Jalen's done, what I think Josh Hart's done, what I think a lot of players on that roster have done is created an environment that is appealing to high-level free agents, or in fact, a desirable location for high-level players who want to be traded. I think in everyone's heart of hearts, as great as Jalen is, and I think he's incredible, and I think Jalen will get to the end of his career and people will look back and say, show me someone who maximised their ability, and there'll be a photo of Jalen Brunson. I think he's incredible, but in his heart of hearts,
Absolutely.
I think that on a championship team, Jalen's probably your number 3 guy and the perfect position to be that. So what I think having Jalen there has done has opened up the ability to get a superstar wing and or big in the short term and build around that. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's what the Knicks do this offseason.
Yeah, some versatility. I agree with you in terms of the Donovan fit because Cleveland, fittingly, are the team that got him, and I felt maybe they pushed all their eggs in the center a year too soon, and they're trying to figure out how that works now with Garland and Spider, the shorter backcourt. But Donovan's been very open about the fact that he thought he was going to the Knicks. He's a Westchester native and from New York, and I don't think the story's closed on that. There's another year or two to play before he's unrestricted free agent. Could you still see the Knicks, looking in down that avenue if they didn't need to give up a lot of assets?
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know what the CBA is going to dictate with regard to salary. I would imagine, from my observation, from watching enough games firsthand and a lot from here in Australia, is that there's a desperate need for a shooter, for a knockdown shooter and a wing defender, and a genuine perimeter big or a scoring big, someone to play alongside the bigs. You've got to, whether or not, I don't know how Julius Randle fits long term. I don't know how RJ Barrett fit long term, but one thing that this season did, whether or not they choose to keep them or offer them up as trade potential, is that they've maximised their trade value. And if they were to move either of those guys, which you would likely need to do to get a star in, that their value is higher than what it was 12 months ago. I'm fascinated to see what they do. My relationship with Leon's that I never ask him, and I don't want to know because I don't want to say anything. But when you watch a team for a long time, you get a sense of what they might need, I suppose.
Would you have those like basketball conversations with him, just in general, like philosophy wise, or is it more just
he's got
chat?
He'll ask questions randomly, but my opinion would be right down the bottom and one of 1,000 that he's asked, I would imagine. The thing is, when you're around basketball all the time, the last thing you want to do when you catch up with someone you haven't seen in a long time is talk basketball. You want to catch up.
Yeah.
It's going to be a fascinating off-season. I think I just have this sense that the Knicks will be better again next year, and I just feel that they might move one of those 2 guys to bring that star in.
Yep. There's been so much rumors and news drop in the last 48 hours, Chris, as you know, heading in towards the draft. Draft night is a big night for moves and free agency. But in terms of Leon's front office, he's surrounded himself with a lot of knowledgeable, experienced executives. Walt Perrin coming across from Utah, Worldwide Wesley, who I don't know if you've met before, but he was obviously a long connection.
I was in New York in November. He's a good man.
Oh yeah, Wes. Yeah,
Now,
yeah,
look, one thing. Yeah, you asked me before. One of the greatest lessons Leon's taught me, and there've been a few great leaders of men I've been around, and Brian Gorgian, who I referenced, is another. But I think the really, really good ones, like those two, understand what they're not great at or what their absolute strengths are not, and bring in experts in those areas to surround themselves with. They're not threatened by talent, they're not threatened by expertise, they empower it. And I don't know enough about the Knicks' front office, but I can only imagine that's what Leon's gone and done.
yeah. And you mentioned earlier that he likes to just get all his work done behind the scenes. You know, some fans actually don't feel any kind of way about him not speaking enough because we're used to it. You know, it sort of comes from the maybe the ownership and the media policy, but Leon seems comfortable and he's allowed to do what he needs to do. Um, do you think it's something that he will grow in his role, or he just doesn't even care about that? He just wants to be
He
successful.
he wants he doesn't want to be successful. He wants the club to be successful, and he wants the light to shine on those who it should. It's never been about him. The minute he jumps in front of a microphone, it's about him. Uh, the players, the coaches, the other people making the choices, the drafts, or whoever it might be. That's who sit in front of the microphone and represent the club. Leon facilitates them being there.
You mentioned a couple of other agents that have sort of paved the way. Bob Myers, Rob Pelinka, Leon, they've all had sort of their element of success, and Leon's still growing. But could you see this still opening the door for more, key player agents to move into front offices, and especially if Leon, continues to get the Knicks winning?
Yeah, the right one, yes. It's still personality based. It's got to come from a level of trust. There are a lot of agents out there. There are some really good ones. There are a lot of subpar agents as well. So I think it comes down to the individual situation, the personality of the agent. But one thing good agents have is good relationships across the league and across numerous teams, and that can only help, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely. You were a teammate of Steve Nash, who is the godfather of RJ Barrett as well.
Whereas
Yeah, is there any sort of thoughts you've got towards? Have you been in contact with Steve a lot? Are you still good mates? And what do you know about RJ?
not much about RJ. I caught up with Steve in November while I was over there, and caught up in his Manhattan bar that I'm sure everybody knows that he's got, which is a good little spot.
Yeah, he's a
Um,
big soccer man too, I think.
he's a huge soccer man. We were there during the World Cup, so we saw a game.
Yeah,
Um, Steve's one of those unicorns, one of those incredible human beings who not many people at the start of his career would have envisaged the success that he would have. And he's one of those rare players that, we've spoken about it recently with Nikola Jokic, who makes people around him better. And he walks into a locker room and makes that locker room a better place to be. That's, I think, the highest compliment you could give anyone. And look, I've got so many anecdotal stories about how hard Steve Nash worked when he was struggling, and how good his attitude was when he was struggling, and how early people in Dallas gave up on him. But you'd catch him working out at 10 o'clock at night, as opposed to speaking to his agent about getting traded or moving, or he's had enough. He was just a pro. And everybody knows all of the Steve Nash NBA stories and what he did, but Steve led the Canadian national team with the Sydney Olympic Games, and they don't award the most valuable player award. But if anyone's ever got the time, go back and find highlights or find commentary around what Steve did in Sydney. For those 2 weeks, he was the best basketball player in the world.
yeah, definitely talk about a guy who got the most out of himself as well, similar to Jalen. And I think that's going to rub off with RJ Barrett. He's going to be a guy that gets the most out of himself, still only 22 years old. I wanted to ask you, Chris, you were a teammate of another beloved New York native, Ron Artest, Meta World Peace. How was he as a teammate, sort of especially as a young man in the league? Any
he was.
stories you could share?
Let me preface my answer now, knowing what we do around mental health, and Ron's come out and spoken a lot about his struggles that we had no idea at the time. So what Ron represented as was acting out of control, full of self-confidence. Yeah, and even he was an early second round, late first round, or early second round draft pick. I think he was late first.
We may have just lost Chris for a minute, but I'm sure he'll refresh and jump back in. But yeah, CT talking to Chris Anstey. Chris is back. Yeah.
I was saying Ron had as much ability in his own, as much confidence in his own ability as anyone I've seen. Was highly emotional, both good and bad. Was immature for his age, but what we now know years later and some of the things he battled with it, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. I watched the documentary, the Malice in the Palace documentary, with interest. You know what? There are enough anecdotal stories that it didn't surprise me, but as much as anything, you wish you could go back in time, wrap your arms around him, and understand better.
Yeah, most definitely. And obviously, you mentioned the support network you had and the people around you. Not every player has that in the league. I'm sure you can appreciate. You just need that good support network, and which Knick fans believe RJ Barrett has, Jalen Brunson has, Randall has. But if a player doesn't have that, we could talk about Ja Morant and some other tales going on. But yeah, it's very, very important. And obviously, there's certain coaches. You mentioned Brian Gorgian as well. Any sort of valuable lessons you've taken from your NBA coaches as well?
Don Nelson always wanted to be different, and he loved uniqueness. And it's from some of the defensive strategies to the ideology around decision making. He was one of the first to go with small ball before it was a thing. He was one of the first to allow bigs to shoot. He was one of the first to dare. I remember a game I guarded Muggsy Bogues, and my instruction was to stand 15 feet off him and dare him to verbally dare him to shoot it every time. Sit in the lap of Chris Webber or sit in the lap of their biggest threat. And if Muggsy had 35 and if you went back out, some players had career highs on us, but their stars didn't score, and that was how we found a way to compete. So I've always loved exploring, and a lot of this was Don Nelson. I've always loved exploring alternate ways to do things that many haven't considered and asking why not.
Yeah, definitely. The game has evolved so much, and you've been part of that as a player, as a coach yourself, playing FIBA internationally. We've got a big FIBA tournament coming up. I mean, the state of the game now, Chris, internationally, in the NBA wise, it's just great to see so many successful international players. What are some of your things that you enjoy watching about the game, evolve now, sitting from afar?
Watching the NBA, I love watching college basketball. My daughter's actually playing college basketball at UCLA. I love watching the different styles of game in Europe, and Australia is different again. It's truly a global game. The NBA will always remain the best league in the world, but the gap's smaller. You can watch games on any continent in nearly any country and get really high levels. And you look at the best players in the NBA right now: Giannis, Doncic, Luka. You've got Embiid. International players doing so well. It used to be that international players were considered soft, that there was a lack of awareness of international players from the United States basketball public. So what I would say is that the awareness in the United States has grown exponentially, and the level of respect given to any international player that comes in is significantly greater than what it used to be. And it took players like Drazen Petrovic, Vlade Divac, Tony Kukoc to, I think, prove that non-Americans could compete and compete well in the NBA. And the guys since have just taken that torch and run with it.
Yeah, but yeah, credit to the early pioneers in the NBA who influenced international players. Everyone idolized an NBA player growing up. We saw old school images of Jokic wearing a Denver Nuggets top. We've had guys that, the internationally images surface. But a guy I want to ask you about who the Knicks used to have, Kristaps Porzingis. There's talk, a lot of Knicks fans who would like that kind of game on this current team, a player that can stretch it. Another guy is Karl Anthony Towns, another big man that can stretch it. Just sort of factoring that in and seeing what Mitchell Robinson did with the Knicks, being a huge defensive anchor. Like, what is your philosophy on, because finding a big man that can do everything isn't easy anymore. There's no more Hakeems or, there's one Joel Embiid at the moment.
I agree 100% with, and I've got my own podcast here in Australia as well. And, for me, as maligned as he might be, Karl Anthony Towns would be a perfect fit. From a skill set perspective, I don't know him as a human being, so I can't comment. Someone that, as you say, can stretch the floor, can play the 4 or the 5, give you various looks, will make players around him better by providing space. And he's multi-skilled. I think he would be ideal. As you say, that Porzingis type player, whether it's one of those two or someone else, but there aren't that many out there. But I agree 100%.
Yep. So yeah, obviously you need a bit of balance, Chris, offense and defense. So do you think the days of just a pure defensive center is sort of going to be phased out? Because, we love Mitch and his rebounding and his defensive play, but offensively, the Knicks, needed a bit more in the playoffs, I feel, against Miami. Bam's that guy who's a little bit undersized, but gives both. So he's a really versatile kind of guy.
I think you need to have one weapon. I think players like Mitch on a championship team would be, throw him at Jokic for 10 minutes or throw him at in 3 years' time, it may very well be Wembanyama. Yeah, you throw him at him for 10 minutes, understanding that you'll probably have to put 3.5 scorers alongside him to keep the scoreboard ticking over and create scoreboard pressure. So I certainly think there is still a role. I don't think it's a starting role in a successful team, but it's a crucial role in a winning team. It's injury insurance. People never tend to think about what you get on the practice floor either, and how having someone like DeAndre Jordan would have helped Nikola Jokic, in his one-on-one not development, but keeping him sharp at practice. Here in Australia, a lot of people understand the impact Matthew Dellavedova would have had off the floor at Sacramento in helping shift their culture with the level of competitiveness he would have brought to the training floor every day and kept De'Aaron Fox accountable. For someone who played next to no minutes over the season, I'm sure he had an impact. And I think Mitch Robinson will find himself in that type of a role, playing more minutes than Daly did, but on a very good team in a couple of years if he's still there.
Yeah, you hit the nail there. With a team sport, it's critical everyone buys into a role. You could be a superstar in a role, like Bruce Brown was, Gabe Vincent, Max Strauss. But yeah, you hit the nail also with the practice players, how valuable they are. I think I saw a tweet from you mentioning, here in Australia, they don't give a medal to premiers unless they were, winning, they were playing the final game. Whereas I think in the NBA, they do it right. They give a ring to everybody who contributed throughout the season, because it's a grind, man. 82 games, it's huge.
Use Jack White as the Australian on the Denver Nuggets roster that didn't put on a uniform throughout the playoffs, but he would have spent more hours on the training court than the starters when it came around. He was on the plane every day. He was back in the G League. He was on the training court every day. He put in as many hours. His role wasn't one that translated onto the court in the important games, but his role helped prepare those guys that were. And for the low minute guys, when the high minute guys had days off, it takes guys like that to enable practice to even happen in a competitive way, let alone be of high value. So I love that the NBA choose to distribute rings to all players who had an impact or contributed to the. Yeah, I just don't think we quite get that right here in Australia with our football league, especially given the players can't be traded. We had a situation here where the captain of the club I support, the Western Bulldogs, Bob Murphy, did his ACL midway through the season and missed the grand final clearly and wasn't awarded a premiership medal as captain of the club because he didn't play on that day, and the head coach took his medal off and presented it to him because he recognised the impact that the captain had around the club every single day, even with a snapped ACL. So yeah, I do like the way they do it. It's a very long answer to a short question.
Yeah, no, all 15. That's what Nick fans have appreciated about our recent team. We do have quite a lot of depth, brought in Josh Hart. But just getting back to Leon again and his connections and loyalty, Chris, I have to ask you about his loyalty to Tom Thibodeau, a guy who he's had a connection with for a long time. And as a fellow coach yourself, former player, what are your thoughts on Tom Thibodeau, what he's done he's won, I think he's only one of 3 coaches to ever win 2 Coach of the Years. There's talk he's an amazing regular season coach, but simple kind of philosophies and schemes in the playoffs that can sometimes struggle. But I believe if you give any coach, the right roster, they can still win. But just with Tibbs and the Knicks, what are your thoughts on that?
You still need talent to win. You can't just magically produce talent when the playoffs come around. And as you know, they're much more heavily scouted. I think my initial thought when Leon hired Tibbs was one thing I learned as a coach was that, and I tell players this when I speak to them, is that when I look down the bench to go to put someone into the game, I need to know exactly what's the worst thing that can happen if I put you in the game? What's my exposure to risk? And if I'm comfortable with that, you're coming. I know what the worst thing that can possibly happen is you're going to bust your ass, run the lanes, rebound like crazy. Whether you make shots or not's irrelevant. That's skill. What I don't want to do is look down the bench and see someone who's erratic, inconsistent, where I'm crossing my fingers and hoping I get the best version of you and praying I don't get the worst. Now, with Tibbs, I can only imagine that when Leon came to hiring him, he knew exactly what he was going to get on Tibbs's worst day. And that Tibbs's worst day was really, really good. Now, when it comes to winning in playoffs, Tibbs hasn't had the roster at the Knicks that I think has been capable of doing that. I think as a Knicks roster, you probably, from what I saw in person in November, I feel that you overachieved with the current roster that the Knicks had this year, but have set the foundation to take a massive step. And I think the year Leon came in, it was a double-edged sword because the Knicks did so well. There was a heightened level of expectation coming into that second year that was probably inflated and a couple of years ahead of where it should have been. But I think the club's exactly where it should be now. It's got great foundations. You give Tibbs a little bit more talent as a coach, and you can do more with more talent.
Yeah, it starts with the talent first, and then a coach on how to get the most out of that talent as well. The rotation's quite jammed, so Knicks fans wait with anticipation with the draft, whether or not, most likely if the Knicks do make a move, Chris, it's going to be maybe a 2-for-1, where we're sending a couple of players out to consolidate a big piece. Like you mentioned, it could be a big man, one of Randall or Barrett. If there is one major move that you would do, let's say if you were running this thing or wanting to coach this roster, what's the best move you would look at?
I'd ask if Zion Williamson was available and see if you can bring him in for whatever it took. I'd ask if Karl Anthony Towns was available and if Minnesota had given up on him and Gobert. And I wouldn't do it to the detriment of all of the depth of the club. The log jam could be really beneficial when you've got guys like McBride, who I think are exceptional players who still provide value to a potential another team as well. Um, I don't know what that piece looks like. I don't get into the whole, the draft machine, but I'd ask
Yeah.
if those two guys were available and get high level talent to go alongside Jalen Brunson without giving up too much.
Yeah, those are certainly some big names in the spotlight. Um, but yeah, it's been amazing chatting, Chris, about your journey as well. What's the most proudest accomplishment you've achieved? You know, being in the NBA, winning the Olympics, coaching. What are your main highlights?
Oh, it's the easy one of the championships, but there's something special about doing something that's never been done before and doing it for the first time and in some tiny way proving that it's doable. So, you know, getting to the NBA via the NBL had never been done before. It had only been done through college, and there are so many in our Next Stars program here now who use the NBL as a very strong pathway to get there. You know, an Australian male national team had never won a gold medal in international competition, and we won the under 23 World Championships and defeated the USA in the quarterfinal along the way. The Argentinian team we beat, Ginobili, Porto, these sort of guys, um, that had never been done before. So look, those two sit really high, but there's a part of me that still loves sharing what I've learnt with others who aspire to be there, and if that can provide some help in some way, then for me, that's what I'd like to continue to do. And who knows, my biggest one may be yet to come.
Yeah, I was actually about to say that, because yeah, it's a game we all love, but you can continue to contribute beyond playing days, mentoring, coaching, and all of that. Why don't you just tell everyone a bit about what you're doing outside of the game now? You're giving back a lot. You're allowing tours being organised so Australians can travel abroad into the places like Madison Square Garden, Dallas, and meet former legends and speak and meet with yourself.
Yeah, in a basketball sense, that's it. We sat through COVID here and it was really rough, and got to a stage where I wanted to surround myself with the right people and do things I enjoyed and wanted to share. And I've still got a whiteboard that sits behind me in the other room that says I want to create events and experiences that inspire, impact, educate, and create humor. So we took two tour groups to the United States, primarily New York and Dallas last year, and essentially gave everyone a peek behind the curtain. Leon was great in the access he gave us to the Knicks. The Mavericks were great in the access they gave us there, as were the Celtics. So we've got 80 Australian basketball fans here who the feedback's been phenomenal. So we'll continue to do that. We ran some events here locally with Josh Giddey, with Luke Longley, and we brought Dirk Nowitzki over. I'm really interested in sharing their stories and their lessons with people who would never get the opportunity to hear from them in person. So we'll continue to look for the right people to bring here to Australia and share stories as well. And I wrote a book through COVID to share. It occurred to me that I've been in a really privileged position that I've learnt from so many great people over the years. The more people needed to hear and learn from them that they won't. And I just wanted to share them. So look, if anyone's interested if they've never heard of me before this and they've got an interest, chrisanstey.com.au, everything I do is on that. It's been a lot of fun reconnecting with my NBA network, opening some old doors. And I've never been one of those people who's asked for favors. And I think Leon was a little bit surprised when I called him and asked for a favor. He said, "What do you need?" I said, "All I need is the name of the ticketing guy." He said, "That's it?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to buy 80 tickets." He goes, "All right, I'll make sure they treat you well." And so that's our relationship, and it's been fun. I still love the game. I didn't grow up playing the game, so basketball for me works in reverse. I was a professional very, very early, and now I love giving back to those who haven't been professional or don't have access to it. And I
Yep.
see the basketball world through my daughter's eyes at the moment as she finishes her senior year at UCLA.
Yeah, that's a great story, and we're very appreciative of you giving back to Australian basketball as you were, pioneering back in the days as well, but still so much more to give. And yeah, you mentioned about yeah, like the Olympics internationally and all of that. It's just a great story, and the connections you still have with Leon. Yeah, it's been a pleasure talking, and we hope to yeah, chat again soon.
It's been a fun ride. I look forward to getting over to New York again this November and having a beer with Leon somewhere nobody knows who he is.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. And when you start late, you mentioned, starting late in the sport like Joel Embiid did, it sort of gives you a bit of an advantage, I feel, as well as some disadvantage where your focus is you're not overawed by legends before you. You're just all about trying to achieve success and greatness, because you're clearly talented, but you just started later.
I was fascinated in what I could do. I didn't have any bad habits. That was the greatest part. I didn't pick up a basketball until I was 17. And when I shot a ball, I got taught to do it. I hadn't done it wrong for 10 years. So fundamentally, I was reasonably sound. And I still think that's a big, so many kids grow up with coaches who are so interested in winning an under 12 tournament and letting kids get away with the wrong shooting technique, for 2, 4, 6 years, then it's too late. And
Yeah.
everyone catches up. So I've always been an advocate of that. And, that I think that was one of the biggest benefits of me starting so late.
Yeah, and if you could just give maybe the viewers a bit tip on free throw philosophy, because it does frustrate a lot of us Nick fans that players are missing free throws. Mitchell Robinson, he's putting in a lot of time, and credit to him. He sunk a couple of big ones in the playoffs, but he's below 50%, I think. And how does a player overcome shooting
Yeah,
below 50%?
as a big, especially, shoot it high, exaggerate how high in the air you shoot it, and then bring it back. I mean, it's just finding something that's replicatable that you can do every time. And in simple
Yeah,
terms, give the ball the best chance of going in. The best way a basketball's got of going in a ring is to get that elbow high, get the ball high in the air, and get used to repeating it. It'll feel horrible for a while, but
mm.
taking the time to change your shot and being confident that's going to help it. Yeah, you're right, but
Arc
shoot
on
them,
it.
hundreds and hundreds and thousands of them.
Yeah, get that arc on it. Well, yeah, Chris, it's been a pleasure. Yeah,
Loved it.
enjoy your
Thanks.
day.